The rejection letter from her father's estate lawyer arrived on the same day Fiona Oakes turned 23, and she decided that very evening to marry a vampire. Not just any vampire. The Vampire King himself. She'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the city had. Vladislas Drăculești, ancient beyond measure, ruler of the vampire courts that existed in the shadows beneath the modern world. A creature of such power and presence that even his name was spoken in whispers. He owned half the buildings in downtown, controlled entire industries through proxies, and was rumored to have crushed rebellions among his own kind with nothing but a look and a well-placed word. Fiona had never met him, but she knew exactly where to find him. The Crimson Estate sat at the edge of the financial district, a towering Gothic mansion that looked like it had been ripped from another century and deposited among the glass skyscrapers. It should have looked out of place. Instead, it made everything around it seem temporary and insignificant. She dressed carefully that night. A black dress that cost 3 months of her barista salary, heels she could barely walk in, and her mother's pearl necklace the only thing they hadn't taken from her when they'd cut her off. Her dark auburn hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and she'd lined her green eyes with just enough kohl to look dangerous instead of desperate. The bouncer at the entrance was human, surprisingly, but his eyes held the flat awareness of someone who'd seen too much. He looked her up and down, and Fiona lifted her chin. "I'm here to see Vladislas Drăculești." "Yeah? You and everyone else, sweetheart. This is a private club. Tell him Fiona Oakes wants to make him an offer he'll find amusing." Something in her voice must have convinced him because he spoke quietly into a radio, waited, then stepped aside with a bemused expression. "Top floor. Don't say I didn't warn you." The elevator was all black marble and gold fixtures, and it rose so smoothly she barely felt the movement. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world that shouldn't have existed. The penthouse was vast, decorated in deep crimsons and blacks, with furniture that looked centuries old and probably was. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city glittering below, but the glass was clearly treated. No moonlight penetrated too brightly, and the artificial lighting was dim and warm. Vampires moved through the space with that particular grace that marked their kind, all of them pale as marble with hair ranging from silver to pure white. They wore modern clothes mixed with older pieces, a waistcoat here, an antique ring there, and they all turned to look at her when she entered. But Fiona only had eyes for the figure seated in the high-backed chair at the far end of the room. Vladislas Drăculești looked like a king even sitting still. He was tall, she could tell that, even seated, with the kind of presence that made everything else fade into insignificance. His skin was alabaster white, flawless and inhuman in its perfection. His hair fell to his shoulders in waves of pure white, contrasting sharply with the black of his elegant suit. His features were sharp and aristocratic, beautiful in the way that Renaissance paintings were beautiful, timeless and slightly unreal. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, crimson, deep as blood, ancient as stone. They fixed on her as she approached, and she felt the weight of centuries in that gaze. "Miss Oakes." His voice was accented, something old European that had mellowed over time but never quite disappeared. "My doorman said you had an amusing offer for me. I confess, I'm intrigued. It's been some time since a human walked into my domain and demanded an audience." Fiona stopped a few feet from his chair, forcing herself not to fidget with her necklace. The other vampires had formed a loose circle around them, watching with the predatory interest of immortals who rarely found anything surprising. "I want you to marry me." The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone laughed, a silvery sound that held more menace than humor. Vladislas didn't laugh. He leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on one elegant hand. "How wonderfully direct. And why would I do such a thing? Because it will irritate absolutely everyone in both our worlds, and I think you'll find that entertaining." Fiona took a breath, steadying herself. "My family disowned me 6 months ago. My father married his secretary, a woman younger than me, and decided his new wife didn't appreciate having a grown daughter around. My mother died when I was 10, so there was no one to argue. He cut me off completely. No trust fund, no inheritance, nothing. I've been working 3 jobs just to keep my apartment." "Tragic," Vladislas murmured, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. "But hardly my concern. Today I found out he's dying. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less, and he's leaving everything to his wife and her family. 20 years of being his perfect daughter, and I get nothing." Fiona's voice shook with genuine rage now, and she let it show. "So I want to show up at his funeral wearing a wedding ring, married to the most powerful, most dangerous creature in the city. I want to introduce you as my husband and watch every single member of my family realize that I've moved so far beyond their petty human concerns that they might as well be insects." Vladislas was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, and Fiona understood why people feared him. It was a beautiful smile and absolutely predatory. You want revenge? I want them to know they didn't break me. That I found something better, and you think I'm better? He rose from his chair in one fluid movement, and suddenly he was standing in front of her, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I'm a vampire, Miss Oakes, a killer, a monster by any human definition. I've lived for over 1,000 years, and I've done things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your very short life. Fiona held his gaze. But you're also a king. You have power, wealth, respect. You're everything my family pretends to be and will never actually achieve. That's all I need. And what do I get out of this arrangement? Entertainment, like I said. And maybe, she hesitated, then pushed forward, maybe the satisfaction of helping someone take back a little dignity. I can't imagine that's common in your world. He studied her for what felt like an eternity, those crimson eyes seeming to see straight through her. Then he turned away, moving to the windows to look out over the city. Your family would reject you completely. They might even try to have you committed or declared mentally incompetent. Marrying a vampire, marrying me specifically, would mark you as an outsider in human society. I'm already an outsider. You would have to live here in my domain, share my space, attend vampire court functions, navigate politics that have killed humans far more experienced than you. I'm a fast learner. I would not love you. He said it flatly, without cruelty but without any softness either. This would be a transaction, nothing more. Something in Fiona's chest twisted at that, but she ignored it. I'm not asking for love, I'm asking for a partnership. Vladislas turned back to her, and that predatory smile was back. Very well, Miss Oakes, I accept your offer. We'll marry within the week. Vampire ceremonies are less bureaucratic than human ones. You'll move into the estate immediately. And in 6 months, when your father dies, we'll attend his funeral together and let your family see exactly what you've become. Fiona's heart was racing, but she extended her hand. Deal. He took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he raised it to his lips. His skin was cool against hers, and when he smiled again, she caught a glimpse of fangs. Welcome to the darkness, my dear. The next 3 days passed in a blur of impossible activity. Fiona quit all 3 of her jobs with a single phone call. Vladislas's assistant handled it, along with settling her lease and arranging for her meager belongings to be moved to the estate. She was given an entire wing of the mansion, a suite of rooms that was larger than her old apartment, and decorated with a mixture of antique elegance and modern comfort. The vampire court, she discovered, was both exactly what she'd expected and nothing like it. There was Seraphine, Vladislas's second-in-command, a female vampire with silver hair and ice-blue eyes who looked at Fiona like she was an interesting science experiment. There was Casimir, the head of security, built like a warrior and carrying himself with military precision. And there were dozens of others, all of them ancient, all of them beautiful, all of them watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and disdain. They think you're a pet, Seraphine informed her on the second day, her tone matter of fact. A pretty human toy that Vladislas will tire of quickly. They were in one of the estate's many sitting rooms, and Fiona was trying to learn the basics of vampire etiquette. It was like being thrown to the deep end of a pool filled with sharks. What do you think? Fiona asked. Seraphine tilted her head, considering. I think you have more spine than most humans. Whether that's enough to survive here remains to be seen. Our king is complicated. He doesn't do anything without reason, but his reasons are often opaque even to those of us who've known him for centuries. He said yes because he found the situation amusing. Perhaps. Or perhaps he saw something else in you. Seraphine rose gracefully. Either way, you should know that vampire marriages are binding and human marriages aren't. Once completed, it will create a link between you, nothing mystical, but something recognized by our laws and customs. You'll be under his protection, absolutely. Harming you would be harming him. That's no small thing. Fiona absorbed this, feeling the what she'd selection, and if he wants to end it, then he'll end it. Vladislas is king, he does as he wishes. Seraphine paused at the door, but he's also bound by honor in ways you don't yet understand. If he's given you his protection, he won't withdraw it lightly. Whatever else he is, he keeps his word. The wedding ceremony took place on the 4th night, in a chamber deep beneath the estate that Fiona hadn't known existed. The room was circular, carved from stone that looked ancient beyond measure, with symbols etched into the walls that hurt to look at directly. Candles provided the only light, hundreds of them, and the vampire court assembled in their finest. Fiona wore a dress that Vladislas had provided, white silk that fell like water, with lace sleeves and a train that pooled behind her. It was beautiful and terrifying, making her look like a bride from a fairy tale. The dangerous kind. Vladislas wore black, as always. but his suit was clearly special, embroidered with patterns that caught the candlelight, and he wore a heavy medallion around his neck that marked him as royalty. His white hair was pulled back, showing the sharp lines of his face, and those crimson eyes were fixed on her as she approached. There was no officiant, she realized. Just the two of them and the witnesses. In my culture, Vladislas said, his voice carrying through the chamber, marriage is a contract sealed in blood. Nothing more, nothing less. It requires consent, freely given, and a mark that binds. He produced a knife from somewhere, the blade gleaming silver in the candlelight. Your blood and mine mixed together. Do you consent, Fiona Oakes? Her mouth was dry, but she nodded. I consent. He took her hand gently, almost tenderly, and drew the blade across her palm. The pain was sharp but brief. Blood welled up, red and very human against her pale skin. Then he cut his own palm without hesitation, and his blood was darker, almost black in the dim light. He pressed their hands together, and Fiona felt something shift. Not magic, she didn't believe in that, but something fundamental nonetheless. A recognition, perhaps, that she'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. By blood given and blood shared, Vladislas said, I claim you as mine, my wife, my responsibility, under my protection until death or dissolution. Do you accept this claim? I do. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Then it's done. He released her hand, and she saw that the cuts were already healing on his palm. Vampire regeneration. Hers still bled sluggishly. He noticed, and before she could react, he raised her hand and pressed his lips to the wound. The sensation was electric. Not painful, but intimate in a way that made her breath catch. When he released her hand, the bleeding had stopped, though the cut remained. That will scar, he said quietly, for her ears only. A reminder of what you've chosen. Then he turned to the assembled vampires, and his voice rang with authority. Behold my wife. Any who harm her answer to me. The proclamation sent a ripple through the crowd, and Fiona understood the weight of it. She wasn't just married. She was claimed by the vampire king himself, marked as untouchable. Seraphine approached first, bowing her head in a gesture of respect. Welcome to the court, Lady Oakes. Others followed, offering congratulations that ranged from genuine to coldly formal. Fiona accepted them all with as much grace as she could manage, very aware of Vladislas beside her, a solid presence radiating power and control. When it was over, he escorted her back to the main level of the estate, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The touch was possessive but not cruel, and Fiona found herself hyper-aware of it. You did well, he said as they reached her wing. Many humans would have fainted or fled. I'm not most humans. No. He studied her with those ancient eyes. You're not. Rest now, wife. Tomorrow we'll begin preparing for your father's funeral. I assume you want to make an entrance? The biggest one possible. His smile was sharp and approving. Then that's what you'll have. The weeks that followed were strange and intoxicating. Fiona learned to navigate the vampire court, to recognize the subtle power plays and ancient grudges that simmered beneath the surface. She learned that Vladislas ruled with a combination of absolute authority and careful politics, that he could be ruthless when necessary but preferred to solve problems with strategy rather than violence. She also learned that being married to him meant being watched constantly. Not by him directly, he was too busy running his empire for that, but by everyone else. The other vampires were fascinated by her, this human who'd somehow convinced their king to marry her. Some were friendly, like Seraphine, who seemed to have appointed herself as Fiona's unofficial guide. Others were hostile, viewing her as a distraction or worse. And through it all, Vladislas himself remained an enigma. He was unfailingly polite to her, even courteous. He asked about her day, ensured she had everything she needed, and included her in court functions where her presence was appropriate. But there was a distance to it, a formality that reminded her constantly that this was a transaction, not a real marriage. It shouldn't have bothered her. She'd gone into this with her eyes open, knowing exactly what it was. But sometimes, late at night in her too-large suite, Fiona found herself wondering what it would be like if that distance disappeared. She pushed the thought away whenever it surfaced. She'd gotten what she wanted: power, protection, and the perfect revenge. Wanting more was foolish. Her father's condition deteriorated rapidly. The cancer was aggressive, and within 5 weeks of her wedding, she received word that he'd been moved to hospice. He had days, maybe a week. Fiona felt nothing when she heard. No grief, no satisfaction, just a cold emptiness where familial feelings should have been. We should visit him, Vladislas said when she told him. They were in his study, a room lined with books in dozens of languages, some of them so old she was afraid to breathe near them. She looked up sharply. What? Why? Because you'll regret it if you don't. He set down the document he'd been reading, something in what looked like medieval Latin. You can hate him, Fiona. You have every right to. But he's still your father, and he's dying. If there are words you need to say them now while you have the chance. I don't need to say anything to him. Perhaps not, but consider it anyway. His crimson eyes were unusually serious. I've lived long enough to know that unfinished business has a way of haunting us, and I suspect you have more to say to him than you realize. Fiona wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. How many deaths had Vladislas witnessed in his 1,000+ years? How many people had he watched die with words left unsaid? Will you come with me? She asked quietly. If you wish it, I do. They went the next evening after sunset, but before visiting hours officially ended. The hospice was depressingly beige, with fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic barely covering something more unpleasant. Fiona's father had a private room. He'd maintained some wealth even while cutting her off, and she paused outside the door, gathering her courage. Vladislas stood beside her, looking completely out of place in his elegant black suit and antique silver rings. But his presence was steadying, and when he offered her his hand, she took it. Her father looked terrible. The cancer had ravaged him, leaving him gaunt and yellow-skinned. He was hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically and an IV drip pain medication into his arm. His eyes were closed, but they opened when Fiona and Vladislas entered. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition, followed by shock. "Fiona?" His voice was weak, raspy. "What are you doing here, saying goodbye?" She kept her voice neutral, aware of Vladislas's cool presence beside her. "And introducing you to my husband." Her father's eyes moved to Vladislas, and she watched him register the white skin, the white hair, the unmistakable aura of otherness. "You married a vampire, it wasn't a question." Her father's expression cycled through several emotions: disbelief, horror, and finally a weary sort of resignation. "Of course you did. Always so determined to embarrass the family." "I didn't do it to embarrass anyone," Fiona said, though that was a lie and they both knew it. "I did it because you took everything from me and I had to survive. I gave you everything. A home, education, opportunities, and then you took it all away the moment it became inconvenient." Her grip tightened on Vladislas's hand. "I worked 3 jobs to afford an apartment the size of your closet. I ate ramen for dinner most nights. I had to drop out of university because I couldn't afford the tuition you'd promised to pay. And you didn't care. You had your new wife and her family, and I was just an inconvenient reminder of your past." Her father's face crumpled slightly. "Victoria wanted a fresh start. I thought you'd understand. I was your daughter." The words came out harder than she intended. "That should have mattered more than what your new wife wanted." Silence fell, broken only by the beeping of machines. Then her father's gaze moved back to Vladislas, and something like fear entered his eyes. "Are you going to kill me? Is that why you're here?" Vladislas spoke for the first time, his voice cold and aristocratic. "No, you're doing a fine job of that yourself. I'm simply here to support my wife, your wife." Her father laughed bitterly. "You're a vampire. What could you possibly want with a human girl? I could ask what you wanted with a daughter, given how easily you discarded her." Vladislas's tone didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "But I suspect we both know the answer. People are only valuable to you when they serve a purpose. The moment Fiona stopped fitting into your new life, she became disposable." "That's not I didn't save your breath." Fiona cut him off. "I'm not here for an apology or an explanation. I just wanted you to know that I survived. I found something better than anything you ever gave me, and when you're gone, I won't mourn you." Her father's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Fiona felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. But then she remembered all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep in her cramped apartment, all the times she'd gone hungry to make rent, all the unanswered calls and ignored emails. "Goodbye, Dad," she turned and walked out, Vladislas beside her. They made it to the car, a sleek black thing that was probably worth more than her old apartment building, before her legs gave out. Vladislas caught her smoothly, guiding her into the back seat and sliding in beside her. "Breathe," he instructed quietly. "Just breathe." Fiona realized she was shaking, great tremors that ran through her entire body. She'd expected to feel triumphant or vindicated. Instead, she just felt hollow. "I thought I'd feel better," she whispered. "Seeing him like that, so weak, I thought I'd feel like I'd won." Revenge rarely feels the way we expect it to. Vladislas's hand was cool on her back, making slow circles. "But you did what needed to be done. You faced him. You said what needed to be said. That takes courage." "I told him I wouldn't mourn him." "Is that terrible?" "It's honest." He shifted, and suddenly she was pulled against his chest, his arms around her. It was the first time he'd held her like this, and the comfort of it broke something inside her. She cried then, messy and ugly, soaking the front of his expensive suit with tears. She cried for her father, for the relationship they'd never had and never would. She cried for her mother, dead so long ago she barely remembered her face. She cried for herself, for the girl who'd thought if she was just good enough, perfect enough, she'd be loved. Vladislas held her through all of it, saying nothing, just being solid and present in a way that made her feel less alone. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I ruined your suit, I have others." His expression was surprisingly gentle. "Feel better?" "A little." She wiped her eyes, knowing her makeup must be destroyed. "Thank you for coming with me for this. You're my wife. I protect what's mine." He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And maybe Fiona thought in his world it was. Her father died 3 days later. The funeral was held at an obscenely expensive church, and Fiona attended wearing black silk and diamonds, gifts from Vladislas, though he'd presented them with the same casual formality he used for everything involving her. The effect, when they walked in together, was everything she'd hoped for and more. Every head turned. Her stepmother, Victoria, went white. Her father's brother, Uncle Richard, who'd always looked down on Fiona, actually took a step backward. The whispers started immediately. A rustling wave of shock and speculation. Vladislas looked magnificent and terrifying in a black suit with subtle brocade, his white hair falling loose around his shoulders and his crimson eyes surveying the assembled humans with cool disdain. He kept one hand on Fiona's waist, a possessive gesture that made his claim unmistakable. They sat in the front row, Fiona's right as the daughter, though Victoria clearly wanted to object and didn't quite dare. The service passed in a blur of platitudes and carefully edited stories about her father's life. No one mentioned Fiona or her mother. It was like they'd been erased. At the reception afterward, held at her father's house, the house where Fiona had grown up, Victoria finally approached them. She was a petite blonde woman in her late 20s, pretty in a forgettable way, and she looked at Fiona with open hatred. "This is inappropriate," she hissed, her voice low. "Bringing that creature here today of all days." "My husband has a name," Fiona said calmly, "and he has every right to be here. Your father would be horrified. My father stopped caring about what I did the day he married you. Or have you forgotten that he disowned me?" Victoria's face flushed. "That was your own fault. You were disrespectful, ungrateful. I was inconvenient." Fiona felt Vladislas shift slightly beside her, a subtle movement that somehow made him seem larger, more dangerous. "But that doesn't matter anymore. I'm here to pay my respects to the dead, not to argue with you. You're here to flaunt yourself and your monster." Vladislas spoke then, his voice quiet but cutting through the murmured conversations around them like a blade. "Madam, I would choose your next words very carefully. I'm here as a courtesy to my wife, but my patience for human rudeness is extremely limited." The threat in his tone was unmistakable, and Victoria went pale. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and fled. Uncle Richard approached next, his expression a mixture of fear and calculation. "Fiona, we didn't know you'd married. Congratulations." "Thank you." She kept her voice level, though she remembered all the times he'd agreed with her father's decision to cut her off, had told her she was being dramatic when she'd begged for help. "Perhaps we could discuss your father's will." "I'm not interested in the will." Richard blinked. "But surely you have a right. I have everything I need." Fiona gestured to Vladislas, who was watching the exchange with the patience of a predator. "My husband is more than generous. I don't need anything from my father's estate." The dismissal was clear, and Richard retreated, looking baffled. Others approached throughout the afternoon, cousins Fiona barely remembered, family friends who'd ignored her after the disownment, all of them suddenly eager to reconnect now that she'd married power. Fiona was polite to all of them and promised nothing. Vladislas remained at her side, a silent, intimidating presence who made it very clear that Fiona was under his protection. By the time they left, Fiona felt drained but strangely satisfied. She'd done it. She'd faced them all, shown them that she'd survived and even thrived without them. The looks on their faces would sustain her for years. In the car, Vladislas was quiet until they were halfway back to the estate. Then he said, "You handled that well. I had a good deterrent." She glanced at him. "Thank you, for being there, for playing the part so well." Something flickered in his expression, too fast for her to identify. "It wasn't entirely an act." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Your stepmother called you ungrateful. Your uncle tried to manipulate you with talk of inheritance rights. All of them wanted something from you, even in death. It was unpleasant to witness. That's just how they are, perhaps, but you deserve better." He looked at her directly, and there was something in his crimson eyes that made her breath catch. "You deserve people who value you for yourself, not for what you can give them." Fiona didn't know what to say to that. The sincerity in his voice was unexpected, and it made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. "You value me," she said finally, "don't you?" Even if it's just as an entertaining diversion. I value you more than you know." He said it quietly, almost reluctantly. "You're brave, Fiona. Stubborn, reckless, but brave. You walked into my world with nothing but determination and audacity, and you've carved out a place for yourself. That's no small thing. I'm just surviving. You're thriving. There's a difference." He turned back to the window, and Fiona sensed the conversation was over. But something had shifted between them. She felt it in the air, a subtle change in the dynamic that had been purely transactional. It scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. The weeks after the funeral passed quietly. Fiona settled into life at the estate more completely, finding a rhythm that worked. She took over managing some of Vladislas's human-facing business interests. It turned out she had a knack for it, and it gave her something productive to do. She attended vampire court functions on his arm, learning to navigate the complex politics with increasing confidence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the distance between them began to close. It started with small things. Vladislas began joining her for dinner more often, even though he didn't eat human food. They'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing her life before, his centuries of existence, the strange state of the modern world, philosophy, art, music. He was brilliant and well-read, with perspectives shaped by lifetimes of experience, and Fiona found herself looking forward to their conversations more than she wanted to admit. He started touching her more too, a hand on her shoulder as he passed, fingers brushing hers when he handed her something, his palm on the small of her back when they walked together. The touches were always brief, always appropriate, but they left her skin tingling and her heart racing. She told herself it didn't mean anything. He was playing a part, acting the devoted husband for the benefit of his court. But sometimes she caught him looking at her when he thought she wasn't watching, and the expression on his face was anything but detached. 2 months after the funeral, Seraphine cornered Fiona in one of the estate's many libraries. "He's in love with you, you know." The vampire said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. Fiona nearly dropped the book she was holding. "What? No, he's not. This is just an arrangement. It started that way. It's not anymore." Seraphine settled into a chair with inhuman grace. "I've known Vladislas for 300 years. I've never seen him like this, distracted, protective, beyond the bounds of necessity, actually happy. You've done something to him." "I haven't done anything. We barely, this isn't a real marriage, isn't it?" Seraphine tilted her head. "You live together, you attend functions together, you spend your evenings talking. He values your opinion on court matters. He smiles when you enter a room. How is that not real?" "Because he said he wouldn't love me, that this was just a transaction." People say a lot of things, especially ancient vampires who are terrified of feeling something genuine. Seraphine stood. "But I'm telling you, as someone who knows him well, he's falling for you. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Fiona sat frozen long after Seraphine left, her mind racing. Was it possible? Could Vladislas actually care for her beyond the bounds of their arrangement? More importantly, did she want him to? The answer, when she was honest with herself, was yes. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped thinking of this as revenge and started thinking of it as her life. Vladislas wasn't just a means to an end anymore. He was someone she looked forward to seeing, someone whose approval mattered, someone who made her feel valued in a way she'd never experienced. She was falling in love with her vampire husband, and it terrified her. That night, Vladislas invited her to the estate's rooftop garden. It was a place she'd discovered early on, a surprisingly lush oasis of night-blooming flowers and carefully tended plants that thrived in darkness. The city glittered below them and the moon was full overhead. He was waiting by the edge, looking out over the cityscape. The moonlight turned his white hair to silver and made his pale skin seem to glow. He looked like something from a dream, beautiful and otherworldly. "You wanted to talk?" Fiona joined him at the railing, very aware of the scant inches between them. "I've been thinking about our arrangement." His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "It's been 3 months. Your father is dead, your revenge is complete. If you want to end this, the marriage, I would understand." Fiona's heart plummeted. "Is that what you want?" "What I want is irrelevant. This was meant to be temporary, a transaction to serve your purposes. Those purposes are fulfilled. And if I don't want to end it?" He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face stole her breath. There was longing there, and fear, and something that looked like hope. "Why would you want to stay?" he asked. "You could leave, return to your human life. Find someone who can give you things I can't. Sunlight, children, a normal existence." "What if I don't want normal?" Fiona stepped closer, her heart pounding. "What if I want this, the estate, the court, the nighttime conversations, and the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching?" "Fiona, I know what you said at the beginning, that you wouldn't love me. that this was just a transaction. But I think you were wrong. She was close enough now to see the flecks of darker red in his crimson eyes. I think somewhere along the way we both stopped pretending. I'm a vampire, a monster. I've killed people, done terrible things. I'm old enough to be your ancestor dozens of times over. I deserve to make my own choices. She reached up, cupping his face with her hand. His skin was cool beneath her palm, smooth as marble. And I choose you, not for revenge, not for protection, just because when I imagine my future, you're in it. For a long moment, he was perfectly still. Then slowly he covered her hand with his. I told myself I wouldn't let this happen, he said quietly. I've lived so long, seen so much. I thought I was beyond this kind of feeling. But you stubborn, brilliant, beautiful you broke through every defense I had. Is that a bad thing? It's terrifying. He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. The gesture was so tender it made her chest ache. Loving you means accepting that I'll lose you. Humans are so fragile, so brief. You'll grow old and die, and I'll go on without you. That thought is unbearable. Then don't think about it. Fiona stood on her toes, bringing her face closer to his. Think about now. About this moment. About the fact that I'm here and I'm yours and I'm not going anywhere unless you send me away. I could never send you away. His hand moved to her waist, drawing her closer. You've become essential to me. My wife, my companion, He paused, then said the word like it was both a confession and a surrender. My love. Fiona kissed him then, closing the last few inches between them. His lips were cool against hers, but the kiss was anything but cold. It was passionate and desperate, like they were both trying to say everything they'd held back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vladislas rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said again, like he was testing the words. I love you, and it's the most foolish thing I've done in 1,000 years. I love you too, Fiona whispered back, and I'm not afraid of what comes next. As long as we face it together. Together, he smiled. And this time it was genuine and warm, without any of the predatory edge she'd seen before. I liked the sound of that. They stayed on the rooftop for hours, talking and kissing and simply being together in a way they'd never allowed themselves before. When they finally went inside, Vladislas walked her to her suite, but this time when she invited him in, he accepted. The night that followed was tender and passionate, a physical expression of everything they'd been holding back. Vladislas was careful with her, always conscious of his strength and her fragility, but there was nothing distant about it. This was real, intimate, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Afterward, lying in the tangle of expensive sheets with his cool body pressed against hers, Fiona felt something settle in her chest. This was where she belonged. Not in her father's house, not in her cramped apartment, but here with this ancient, powerful creature who'd somehow learned to love her. Are you all right? Vladislas murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. More than all right. I'm happy. Good. He pressed a kiss to her hair. You should be happy. You deserve it. So do you. He laughed quietly. I'm not sure I deserve anything, but I'll take what I can get. And what I want is you. For as long as you'll have me forever, then forever is a long time for a human. Then I guess we'll just have to make the most of it. The months that followed were the happiest of Fiona's life. She and Vladislas settled into their relationship completely, no longer pretending distance or detachment. The court adjusted to the change with varying degrees of acceptance. Some vampires were genuinely happy for their king, while others viewed Fiona's influence with suspicion. But Vladislas made it clear that anyone who had a problem with his wife would have a problem with him, and that was usually enough to quell any overt hostility. Fiona threw herself into court life with new enthusiasm. She helped Vladislas navigate the complexities of managing his empire, offered perspectives on human matters that he sometimes missed, and even began mediating disputes between vampires when a neutral party was needed. She was good at it, and the court began to respect her not just as the king's wife, but as a valuable member in her own right. But as happy as she was, there was always a shadow at the edge of her awareness. Vladislas had been right, humans were fragile. She was aging, however slowly, while he remained eternally unchanged. It was easy to ignore in the day-to-day, but sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression of such profound sadness that it broke her heart. 6 months into their real relationship, the issue came to a head. They were in the library, Fiona reading while Vladislas worked through some ancient legal documents, when Casimir entered with an expression of concern. My lord, there's a situation. One of the lesser vampires has been turning humans without authorization. The council is calling for a tribunal. Vladislas looked up sharply. Who, Mikhail? He claims the human was dying and begged to be turned. The law is clear. Unauthorized turnings are forbidden. Vladislas set aside his documents. Assemble the council. I'll hear this case tonight. The tribunal took place in the same underground chamber where Fiona and Vladislas had been married. The council consisted of the oldest and most powerful vampires in the court, and they sat in judgment as Mikhail was brought before them. The vampire in question was young by their standards, maybe 200 years old, with the typical white skin and hair, but an expression of defiance rather than fear. The human he'd turned stood beside him, a woman who looked to be in her 30s, still adjusting to her transformation. "Mikhail of the Eastern Territories," Vladislas said from his position at the head of the council. "You stand accused of turning a human without authorization from the council or your king. How do you plead?" "Guilty, my lord, but with justification," explained Mikhail, gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Elena. She was dying of a genetic illness, in pain, with perhaps weeks to live. We'd been friends for years, and she begged me to turn her rather than let her die slowly. I couldn't refuse. The law exists for a reason," Seraphine said coldly. "Uncontrolled turning leads to chaos. We have procedures for compassionate cases. Procedures that take months. She didn't have months." The council debated, voices rising in argument. Fiona listened, her mind racing. She understood the need for laws, for control. But she also understood desperation, the desire to save someone you cared about. Finally, Vladislas raised a hand for silence. "The law is clear. Unauthorized turning carries a penalty of exile from the court for a minimum of 50 years. He looked at Mikhail. "However, the circumstances warrant consideration." Elena stepped forward. The newly turned vampire did so, still unsteady on her feet. "Did you truly ask for this transformation, understanding what it would mean?" "Yes, my lord." Her voice was soft but steady. "I was dying, and Mikhail offered me a choice. I chose to live, even if it meant living as a vampire." Vladislas studied her for a long moment, then turned to the council. "I propose a compromise. Mikhail's unauthorized turning stands as a violation of our laws. He'll be censured and placed under observation for the next decade." But Elena was willing, and her transformation was an act of mercy rather than malice. "She'll be accepted into the court, and we'll provide the guidance she needs to adapt." The council murmured among themselves, then one by one they nodded agreement. It was a fair judgment, balancing justice with compassion. But as the tribunal dispersed, Fiona found herself thinking about Elena, about the choice she'd made to become a vampire rather than die as a human, about what it would mean to live forever unchanging, while everything around you evolved and passed away. That night she couldn't sleep. She found Vladislas in his private chambers, standing by the window as he often did, lost in thought. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning around. "Too much on my mind." She joined him at the window. "That tribunal today. Elena chose to become a vampire rather than die. Many would make that choice given the option. Would you turn me if I asked?" The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Finally, Vladislas turned to face her, and his expression was anguished. "Don't ask me that." "Why not? You love me. You said you couldn't bear the thought of losing me. Turning me would solve that problem. It would also destroy what I love most about you." His voice was rough with emotion. "Your humanity, your warmth, the way you experience the world with such intensity because you know your time is limited. If I turned you, all of that would change. You'd become like me, cold, detached, viewing the world through the lens of centuries instead of decades. I'd lose you just as surely as if you'd died, but I'd still be here. We'd still be together. Would we?" Elena is still adjusting, but in a few years she'll start to change. Not physically, but mentally. The things that mattered to her as a human will fade. The relationships she valued will become distant. She'll become something new, something other. And the woman I fell in love with would be gone, replaced by a stranger wearing your face. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "So what's the alternative? I grow old and die while you stay young forever? I leave you alone?" "Yes." He cupped her face gently, his thumbs wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "Because that's the natural order of things. Humans are meant to live and die. It's what makes your lives meaningful. I won't take that from you, no matter how much I want to keep you with me. That's not fair. I know, but very little in this world is fair." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I'll love you for as long as you live, Fiona. And when you're gone, I'll carry that love with me for the rest of my existence. That will have to be enough." They held each other for a long time, both of them acknowledging the painful truth they'd been avoiding. Their time together was limited. There would be no happy forever after, no eternity side by side, but there was now. And that, Fiona decided, would have to be enough. The years that followed were bittersweet. Fiona and Vladislas made the most of their time together, traveling when they could, building their relationship, finding joy in the everyday moments. She continued to age slowly, thanks to the healthy lifestyle and lack of stress, but aging nonetheless. Gray appeared in her auburn hair, fine lines at the corners of her eyes. Vladislas remained unchanged, eternally beautiful and unchanging. But the way he looked at her never altered. If anything, he seemed to treasure her more as the years passed, as if trying to memorize every moment before it was gone. When Fiona was 45, 22 years after their first meeting, she fell ill. It started as a persistent cough, nothing serious, but it progressed rapidly, and within weeks she was bedridden with what the doctors diagnosed as an aggressive form of pneumonia. Vladislas barely left her side. He moved her to his own chambers, keeping her comfortable in the massive bed, and spent hours sitting beside her, holding her hand and talking quietly. "You should be out there," Fiona told him one evening, her voice weak. "Running your empire, managing the court, not wasting time with a sick old woman. You're not old, and you're not a waste of time." He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You're my wife. Where else would I be? I'm dying, aren't I?" She said it calmly, stating a fact rather than seeking comfort. Vladislas was quiet for a long moment. "Yes. The doctors think you have days, perhaps a week. And you won't turn me. I can't. It wouldn't save you. You're too ill. The transformation would kill you outright." His voice cracked slightly. "Even if it didn't, you know my answer. I won't do that to you, I know." She squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm not angry. I understand why. I'm so sorry, my love. If I could trade places with you, if I could give you my immortality, I wouldn't want it. Not if it meant changing who I am." She smiled at him, her beautiful vampire king with his ancient eyes and his broken heart. "I've had a good life, Vladislas, better than I ever expected. You gave me that. You gave me far more. You taught me to love again, to feel something beyond the tedium of endless existence. You made me remember what it's like to be truly alive, even in undeath." They talked through the night, reminiscing about their years together. The wedding, the funeral, the rooftop garden where they'd first admitted their feelings, the trips they'd taken, the arguments they'd had, the quiet moments that had meant more than any grand gesture. As dawn approached, still hours away from touching the shielded windows, Fiona felt herself growing weaker. Vladislas held her closer, and she could feel the coolness of his skin against hers. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I know, so am I. What comes after? Do you believe in anything?" "I've lived too long and seen too much to believe in nothing. There's something beyond this world. I have to believe that." He stroked her hair gently. "And I have to believe I'll see you again, somehow, someday. Promise me something, anything. Don't shut yourself away after I'm gone. Keep living, keep feeling. Find someone else eventually when enough time has passed. I don't want you to be alone forever. Fiona, promise me, please." He was silent for a long moment, then nodded against her hair. "I promise, though I suspect it will be a very long time before I could even consider it." "That's okay, you have time," she smiled weakly. "One of the benefits of immortality. The only benefit. Everything else is just loneliness." Fiona's breathing was becoming labored, each breath a struggle. Vladislas held her tighter as if he could keep her with him through sheer force of will. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for playing the part so well, for making our fake marriage real. I love you too, more than I've loved anything in 1,000 years." His voice was thick, with unshed tears vampires could cry. She'd learned, though it happened rarely, "You were the best thing to ever happen to me. Even though it was just for a little while, especially because of that. You taught me that brief doesn't mean meaningless. That love doesn't have to be eternal to be real." She wanted to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Her vision was graying at the edges, and she felt herself slipping away. The last thing she saw was Vladislas's face, those beautiful crimson eyes filled with love and grief. The last thing she felt was his cool hand in hers, holding on even as she let go. Vladislas sat with Fiona's body long after she'd passed, holding her cooling hand and memorizing the peaceful expression on her face. Seraphine found him there as the sun rose, its light safely blocked by the heavy curtains. "My lord." Her voice was gentle. "The court is waiting. There are decisions to be made. Let them wait, Vladislas." She used his name, not his title, which meant she was speaking as a friend rather than a subject. "You need to let her go, to say goodbye properly, I know." But he didn't move, didn't release Fiona's hand. "I just need a few more minutes." Seraphine nodded and withdrew quietly. In the end, it was nearly sunset before Vladislas finally stood, gently arranging Fiona's body and pulling the sheet over her face. He stood looking down at her for a long moment, then leaned down to press one final kiss to her forehead through the fabric. "Goodbye, my love. Thank you for choosing me." The funeral was held 2 days later, a small affair by vampire court standards. Fiona had outlived most of her human family and friends, and those who remained were too old or too distant to attend. But the vampire court came out in force, paying their respects to the human woman who'd won their king's heart. They buried her in the estate's private cemetery, a place reserved for those few humans who'd earned a place in vampire history. Her grave was marked with a simple stone that read, Fiona Oakes Drăculești, beloved wife. Brief but unforgettable. Vladislas stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left, staring at the fresh earth. He'd lived for over 1,000 years, seen empires rise and fall, watched countless humans live and die. But this loss felt different, sharper, more permanent. Casimir approached quietly. The council is concerned. They want to know if you'll take another wife eventually. For political purposes, if nothing else. No. Vladislas's voice was flat. There will be no other wife. She was irreplaceable. Forgive me, my lord, but that seems impractical. You could live for thousands more years. To spend all of it alone, I promised her I wouldn't shut myself away. That I'd keep living and feeling. I'll honor that promise. He turned away from the grave. But I'll do it as a widower. She was my wife in every way that mattered. That doesn't end just because she's gone. In the years that followed, Vladislas did keep his promise. He continued to rule his empire, to engage with the court, to participate in the world rather than withdrawing into grief. But he never remarried, never took another lover. He wore his wedding ring always, the silver band that matched the one buried with Fiona. Sometimes, late at night, he'd go to the rooftop garden where they'd first admitted their love. He'd stand there, looking out over the city, and talk to her, telling her about his day, about the politics of the court, about the changes in the world that she would have found fascinating. He never knew if she could hear him. He chose to believe she could. 20 years after Fiona's death, a young woman came to the estate seeking an audience. She had auburn hair and green eyes that looked familiar, and when Vladislas met her, he felt his long-dead heart stutter. My name is Catherine Oakes, she said nervously. I'm Fiona's niece, her brother's granddaughter. I never knew her well. She died when I was very young, but my grandmother told me stories about how she married a vampire king out of spite and ended up finding true love. Vladislas studied her, seeing echoes of Fiona in her features. Why are you here? Because I'm in a similar situation. My family is trying to force me into a marriage I don't want, with a man who only values me for my trust fund. I thought, she swallowed hard. I thought maybe you could help. Give me advice or protection, or I don't know. I just didn't know where else to go. For a long moment, Vladislas didn't respond. Then slowly he smiled, a genuine smile, warm and sad and knowing all at once. Your aunt would have liked you, he said. You have her courage, walking into the vampire king's domain and asking for help. So you'll help me? I'll do better than that. I'll teach you what Fiona taught me, that revenge is sweetest when you build something better than what you lost. That spite can be a beginning, but it shouldn't be an ending. He gestured for her to follow him into the estate. Come, let me tell you about your aunt, about the woman who married me despite her cruel family, and ended up changing my life forever. As they walked together into the depths of the Crimson Estate, Vladislas felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Not happiness exactly, but something close to it. Purpose, connection. The sense that Fiona's influence was still rippling outward, still touching lives. She'd told him not to shut himself away, to keep living and feeling. And in helping her niece, in honoring her memory by being there for her family, he was doing exactly that. Fiona had been gone for 2 decades, and would be gone for centuries more. But the love they'd shared, the lessons she'd taught him, those would last forever. Brief didn't mean meaningless. Love didn't have to be eternal to be real. And some marriages, even ones that started as spite and pretense, could become something beautiful enough to echo through the ages. Vladislas had married Fiona Oakes to amuse himself, to play a part in her revenge. But in the end, she'd been the one playing him straight into love, into vulnerability, into remembering what it meant to be truly alive. And he wouldn't have changed a single moment of it. In the estate's library, he still kept her favorite chair exactly as she'd left it, with the book she'd been reading the day she fell ill still marked at the page where she'd stopped. Sometimes he'd sit across from it and talk, sharing his thoughts as if she were still there. The court had learned not to comment on it. Their king had loved and lost, and this was how he grieved, by keeping her memory alive, by honoring the 2 brief time they'd had together. Catherine visited often after that first meeting, and Vladislas found himself taking her under his wing much as he'd once done with Fiona. He helped her navigate her family troubles, gave her the resources to establish her independence, and watched with quiet satisfaction as she built a life on her own terms. She never knew that he saw Fiona in her determined expression, in the stubborn set of her jaw, in the way she refused to back down from what she wanted. It was bittersweet, but it was also a gift, a reminder that Fiona's legacy lived on, that the woman he'd loved had left her mark on the world in more ways than just her effect on him. 30 years after Fiona's death, Vladislas commissioned a portrait to hang in the estate's main hall. It showed Fiona as she'd been at 40, Still beautiful despite the touches of age, her green eyes bright with intelligence and humor. The artist had captured something essential about her: the strength, the warmth, the sheer aliveness that had drawn him in from the very beginning. He unveiled it at a court gathering, and for once he spoke publicly about his late wife. "This is Fiona Oakes Drăculești," he said to the assembled vampires. "She lived for only 67 years, a blink of an eye to us. But in that brief time she accomplished something remarkable. She reminded me that love is worth the risk of loss. That connection matters, even when it's temporary. That being alive, truly alive, means being willing to feel, even when feeling hurts." He looked around at the court, at the immortal faces watching him with varying degrees of understanding. "We live forever," he continued. "We have all the time in the world, but that can make us complacent, disconnected. We forget that time is meaningless without purpose, that immortality is just prolonged existence unless we fill it with meaning." He gestured to the portrait. Fiona knew she had limited time, and she used it fully. She loved fiercely, lived boldly, and left the world better than she found it. That's something worth remembering, whether you live for decades or millennia. The court was silent, absorbing his words. Then Seraphine stepped forward, raising her glass. "To Fiona Drăculești," she said clearly. "May we all find something worth cherishing as much as our king cherished her." "To Fiona," the court echoed, and Vladislas felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with blood or heartbeat. She would have laughed at the ceremony of it, he thought. But she would have been pleased too, knowing that her story had resonated, that her brief life had mattered beyond just the two of them. As the gathering dispersed, Vladislas stood alone before the portrait, looking up at his wife's painted smile. "You played the part too well," he murmured, echoing her words from that final night. "You made me believe in something I thought I'd lost forever. Thank you for that, my love. Thank you for everything." The portrait didn't answer, of course, but in the curve of her painted smile, in the warmth of her captured gaze, Vladislas found what he always found when he thought of Fiona: peace, gratitude, and a love that would last for as long as he existed, no matter how many centuries that turned out to be. She'd married him purely to spite her cruel family. He'd played the part of devoted husband to amuse himself. But somewhere along the way, the fiction had become truth. The arrangement had become real, and two people from different worlds had found something precious in each other. It hadn't lasted forever. It hadn't needed to. Some love stories are measured in decades, some in centuries, but the depth of love can't be measured in time. Only in impact, and Fiona Oakes had impacted Vladislas Drăculești more profoundly than anyone in his 1,000+ years of existence. That was enough, that was everything. And as he walked through his estate, past the rooms they'd shared and the spaces they'd made their own, Vladislas carried her with him. In his memories, in his heart, in the lessons she'd taught him about living fully and loving completely. She was gone, but she would never truly be lost. And that was the real ending to their story, not in death or separation, but in the eternal truth that love, once given and received, becomes part of the very fabric of who we are. Fiona had married a vampire king out of spite, but she'd loved him truly, deeply, completely, and he'd loved her the same way. In a world of immortals and endless time, that brief, brilliant love story shone like a star, brief but unforgettable, just like the woman herself.